Some friendships feel like they were written by God long before the people involved ever realize it. For Achieng and Mwende, their friendship had begun more than 20 years earlier, long before either of them imagined their lives would take them across continents. They had met in Nairobi in their early 20s, two young women trying to figure out adulthood, careers, and faith at the same time. Over the years, life carried them far from home, and Mwende eventually moved to Helsinki, Finland, where the quiet streets and snowy winters were a far cry from the busy warmth of Kenya. Achieng settled in Antwerp, Belgium, building a steady life there after moving in her late 20s for work. Distance never weakened their friendship. If anything, it made it stronger. They called each other regularly, sometimes to laugh, sometimes to complain about work, sometimes to pray together about life's uncertainties, and sometimes they called simply to talk about television. That was how the idea that would change both their lives began. One evening in early 2025, Achieng called Mwende with excitement in her voice. "You will not believe what I've been watching," she said. Mwende laughed immediately. "Let me guess," she said. "K-dramas." Achieng paused in surprise. "How did you know?" "Because," Mwende said proudly, "I've been watching them since 2021. The two of them burst into laughter. For the next hour, they talked about nothing but Korean dramas, dramatic love stories, beautiful scenery, emotional characters, and the culture that surrounded it all. At some point in the conversation, Mwende said something half-jokingly. "We should go to Seoul." Achieng laughed. "Yes, obviously." There was a brief silence. Then Mwende said slowly, "No, I'm serious." Achieng sat up straighter on her couch in Antwerp. "You're serious?" "I work remotely," Mwende continued. "You work remotely. If we planned it properly, we could stay the full 90 days, the longest their visa would allow." Achieng felt a thrill of excitement she hadn't felt in years. 3 months in Seoul, she said softly. Mwende smiled on the other end of the phone. "Let's do it." And just like that, a plan was born. Neither of them knew that the trip they were planning for adventure would become something far more meaningful. Something neither of them had prayed for, but something God had already prepared. Achieng was 38 years old and had lived in Antwerp for nearly a decade. She worked as a freelance content strategist for a handful of European nonprofits, organizations doing work in education, healthcare, and community development across the continent. She was good with words, better with people, and she cared deeply about work that meant something. Her apartment was small but intentional. Books lined the shelves, a small succulent sat on the windowsill. A handwritten verse was pinned above her desk, not for decoration, but because she read it every morning before she started work. Faith was not something Achieng performed. It was simply the architecture of her life. She had grown up in a home where prayer was as ordinary as breakfast. Her parents had raised her to believe that God was involved in the details, not just the big moments, but the ordinary ones too. Over the years, she had held on to that belief even when life made it difficult, especially when life made it difficult. She had loved someone once in her early 30s, and it had not become what she hoped. It hadn't broken her, but it had made her quieter about certain things. More careful, more willing to wait. She had stopped trying to manage that particular area of her life. She had, very deliberately, given it to God and moved on. Life in Antwerp was full and good. Her work was meaningful. Her friendships, especially with Mwende, were sustaining. But there were quiet evenings when she sat by her window watching the city and felt the particular stillness of a life that was complete in most ways, but not quite all. She never spoke about this much. She simply prayed and waited. Seoul, she thought, would be an adventure. She had no idea it would be the answer. 3 months later, the two friends stood inside the bright halls of Achieng International Airport. Mwende had arrived first from Helsinki. Achieng's flight from Brussels had landed just minutes earlier. When Achieng walked through the arrival gate and spotted Mwende, Waiting with a wide grin, the two women rushed toward each other and embraced, laughing loudly enough that nearby travelers turned to look. "We actually did it," Mwende said. Outside the airport, Seoul stretched endlessly in every direction. A massive city filled with towering buildings, glowing signs, and a kind of energy neither of them had experienced before. They had rented a small but comfortable apartment in a lively neighborhood. The plan was simple: work remotely during the weekdays, explore the city during their free time, and Seoul did not disappoint. The first weeks passed like a dream. They visited palaces that had stood for centuries, wandered through street markets that sold everything from handmade ceramics to freshly grilled skewers, tasted food they had never tried before, and argued cheerfully about which dishes were better. They got lost more than once and considered it a feature rather than a problem. Every evening they came home tired and happy, already making plans for the next day. They found it on a quiet side street while searching for somewhere to work one afternoon. Achieng had wanted to get out of the apartment, and Mwende had agreed immediately. They turned a corner and both of them slowed at the same time. The place stood out immediately. Large glass windows allowed the afternoon light to pour in generously. Inside, the space was warm and thoughtfully arranged, wooden tables surrounded by plants, low bookshelves filled with well-read paperbacks, pendant lights hanging at different heights from the ceiling. Above the door, in simple hand-painted letters, were two words: morning verse. Achieng tilted her head to read it. "That's an interesting name for a café," she said. "Oh, we are definitely working here," Mwende replied, already pushing the door open. The atmosphere inside was everything a person needed to stay a while. Soft music played quietly. People sat comfortably with laptops or books. The smell of good coffee mixed with something warm and baked from the kitchen. It felt like the kind of place that had been designed with intention. They ordered coffee and chose a table near the window. Both of them opened their laptops. Neither of them left for 3 hours. That was the first day they noticed the two men behind the counter. They were clearly related, similar features, similar quiet confidence. One moved through the space with easy familiarity, greeting customers and managing the room. The other worked beside him, more reserved, more precise, but with the same calm presence. Achieng noticed the quieter one, not dramatically. She simply noticed him, then she went back to her work. They returned to morning verse the next day, and the day after that. Within 2 weeks, it had become their unofficial office in Seoul. Ji Sung noticed things about Achieng before he spoke to her. This was simply how he was. He was not a man who rushed toward people. He observed first. He paid attention. And there were things about her that were difficult not to notice. The first thing he saw on their 3rd or 4th visit was this. When her coffee arrived, she paused. Not long, just a moment. Her hands folded around the cup, her eyes closed briefly, her lips moving almost imperceptibly. A small, private grace. He didn't say anything. He simply noted it. A few days later, he noticed something else. Alongside her laptop, she kept a small book on the table. Not a notebook, a devotional. She read from it sometimes in the mornings before she opened her computer. Not for long. Just a page, maybe 2. Her finger tracing a line occasionally, the way people do when something lands. He noticed that too. Then one afternoon, she was on a call standing near one of the bookshelves. He wasn't trying to listen, but the cafe was quiet and her voice carried softly. "Just keep praying about it," she was saying. "Don't make a decision from fear. Make it from faith. God hasn't brought you this far to leave you now." She said it with the particular ease of someone who believed it completely. Ji Sung stood there for a moment and thought, there is something different about this woman. It was Mwende who finally broke the invisible barrier. On a quiet afternoon, while waiting for her coffee at the counter, she simply turned to the man preparing it and said, "My friend and I come here almost every day." The man smiled warmly. We noticed. He introduced himself as In Su. Then he gestured toward the man working quietly beside him. My cousin, Ji Sung. Ji Sung looked up. He offered a polite nod, a gentle smile. When his eyes met Achieng, there was something calm and thoughtful in his expression. Nothing dramatic, nothing performed. Just the quiet look of someone who was paying attention. It was a simple moment, but it would become the beginning of something neither of them expected. After the introduction, conversations became natural. Mwende and Sue talked easily from the start. Achieng and Ji Sung moved more slowly. This suited both of them. Their first real conversations were simple. Travel, work, the differences between living in Europe and living in Seoul. Ji Sung had spent 2 years in Canada in his late 20s and understood the particular dislocation of building a life far from home. Achieng found that easy to talk about. One afternoon, Ji Sung asked her about her work. She thought for a moment before answering. "I think I've always believed that words can change things," she said. "I want the work I do to matter beyond a screen." Ji Sung nodded slowly. "That's rare," he said, "to find work that aligns with what you actually believe." She looked at him. "Do you?" she asked. He considered the question carefully, the way he considered most things. "I think Morning Verse started as something practical. My cousin and I needed income, and we both knew how to run a space." He paused, but it became something else. He glanced around the room at the people working quietly, reading, having conversations in low voices. This place is supposed to feel like somewhere you can breathe, somewhere that slows you down enough to think. Achieng looked at him for a moment. "The name," she said. "Morning Verse. Is that from a passage?" Ji Sung smiled slightly. Lamentations 3:23. She knew it without thinking. "Great is your faithfulness." He looked at her. "Morning by morning, new mercies I see," he finished quietly. They sat with that for a moment. The café hummed gently around them. Then he asked carefully, "Can I ask you something personal?" She nodded. "Of course." He hesitated only briefly. "I've noticed the way you hold your coffee before you drink it. The book you read in the mornings. The things you say when you think no one is listening." She was very still. "You seem like someone whose faith is not just something you do," he said. "It seems like something you live." Achieng blinked. She hadn't expected that. "Yes," she said slowly. "I'm a Christian." Ji Sung's expression softened. "So am I." For a moment they simply looked at each other. It was unexpected, but it felt important in a way that neither of them could immediately name. From that day forward, their conversations changed. They talked about church, about prayer, about what it meant to trust God in a season when the path wasn't clear. Achieng found herself speaking about things she rarely spoke about, her faith as it had actually been lived, not just as she presented it. Ji Sung listened the way very few people listen, without preparing his response, without rushing toward the next thought, just present. And though she tried not to think too deeply about it, she began to notice how often she looked forward to seeing him. Weeks passed, coffee turned into shared dinners. Dinners turned into evening walks through Seoul's glowing streets. The four of them, Achieng, Mwende, Ji Sung, Sue, moved through the city with the easy rhythm of people who have simply become part of each other's days. Ji Sung knew Seoul the way only someone who had grown up there and chosen to stay could know it. He took them to a temple tucked into a hillside that most tourists never found, to a night market 2 neighborhoods over that didn't appear on any app but had the best tteokbokki Achieng had ever tasted, to a quiet park by the Han River where the light in the early evening was extraordinary. He didn't talk about these places with any performance. He simply knew them, and he shared them the way he shared everything, quietly, without fuss, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. One evening, after returning to the apartment, Achieng sat quietly on her bed for a long time. Mwende was in the other room laughing at something on her phone, probably texting Sue. The apartment was warm. The city hummed softly outside. And Achieng sat with the particular stillness of someone who has just realized something they are not sure they are ready for. She bowed her head. Lord, what is this? She had built a peaceful life in Belgium. She had made her peace with waiting. She hadn't come to Seoul looking for anything except adventure. But every conversation with Ji Sung felt like something unfolding. Not rushing, not demanding, just opening, like a window being raised on a morning with good light. Meanwhile, Ji Sung had been sitting with his own quiet awareness. He admired her faith, yes, but also her kindness, her humor, which was drier than people expected. The way she gave her full attention to whoever was speaking, as if their words deserved to land somewhere careful. But he also knew something else. She would be leaving soon. And that thought bothered him more than he expected. Their final week arrived faster than any of them were ready for. The last days were full. Places they hadn't seen yet, meals they wanted to have one more time, long evenings at morning verse that no one wanted to end. Achieng, second to last afternoon in Seoul, was spent at morning verse. She sat at her usual table, laptop opened, but she wasn't really working. She was watching the street outside, trying to memorize it. On the evening before her flight, Ji Sung walked her back to the apartment after dinner. The city lights reflected softly across the quiet streets. Neither of them spoke for a while. There was a weight to the silence that both of them felt, and neither wanted to rush past. Finally, Ji Sung stopped walking. Achieng, he said quietly. She turned to look at him. I've been thinking a lot lately. He hesitated before continuing, the careful pause of someone choosing words that matter. Meeting you feels like something God planned. Achieng felt her heart beat faster. And I don't want to pretend it means nothing just because you're leaving. The words hung in the air between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Achieng spoke softly. I've been praying about the same thing. Ji Sung smiled gently. Then maybe we should trust that. They both knew what it meant. Distance, different countries, uncertainty, but they also knew something else. Sometimes, faith means stepping forward, even when the path isn't completely clear. The next morning, Achieng boarded her flight back to Belgium. As the plane lifted into the sky, she looked out the window at the city that had surprised her in so many ways. She had come to Seoul expecting adventure. What she found was something far more meaningful. Later that evening, after landing in Antwerp and settling into her apartment, her phone buzzed. A message from Ji Sung. I miss our coffee conversations already. Achieng smiled, because deep in her heart, she knew something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. And somewhere in Seoul, a man was already looking forward to the day she would return. She had built a peaceful life in Belgium. She had made her peace with waiting. She hadn't come to Seoul looking for anything except adventure. But God had already prepared the man. The café, the conversation, the quiet moment over coffee when two people realized they shared the same faith. She prayed one thing before she left. Lord, what is this? And God was already answering. This is story 1 of the Seoul Trilogy. Story 2 is waiting for you. The story of Mwende, a window seat, and the man who kept it empty for 6 months. Subscribe to Written by Grace, Faith, and Forever Stories. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Sometimes the adventure you plan for fun is the one God uses to change your life.